Hello, everyone. I actually asked Madalena to play the music, even though we were at the hour. I needed a little music this morning. Needed that nice, soothing melody. My friend Craig Taubman. The words that in the beginning of the book of Proverbs, Shema b'ni Musar avicha. Um, so difficult times. Yeah, I know it's been difficult times since most of the time we've been studying together. And yet, let's do this. Let's remove the spotlight. Um, I think many of you know that my mother's been ill. She had a stroke 2 weeks ago, and we've been back and forth to LA quite a bit. Um, yeah, yeah. So, still important to keep studying, important to listen to music, and important to stop and breathe and consider everything, all the blessings in our lives, along with the stress that we're feeling, especially out here near Los Angeles, and being in Los Angeles more than Palm Springs in the last week. We certainly feel it. Okay, so second part of chapter 18. And as I didn't promise, because I've learned over the years not to promise, but as I hoped I would do, was able to remain on this theme of how the Midrash is Proverbs, how the Midrash uses Proverbs to demonstrate something of the lives of those in the Tanakh, in the Hebrew Bible. And and at the same time, there's some interesting, um, especially the way they're worded from a poetic point of view, proverbs here, couplets, as we've had. All right, let's begin with the first one. That to me was a poem, or if I take these 6 lines together, a passage or a poem having to do with up and down, height, so high and low. So, Richard, why don't you start us off with 10 to 12, please?
Audio on. Okay, there we go. Um, God's name is a tower of strength to which the righteous run and are safe. The wealth of the rich is their fortress. In their fancy, it is a protective wall. Before ruin, a person's heart is proud. Humility goes before honor.
Okay. Initial reactions, comments, or questions?
Rabbi, are they talking about knowledge or wealth?
I think both.
Okay.
I think there's both here. So it's not, in other words, there's something a little bit disingenuous in the way that I print these up in different units because it's too hard to do the whole, it's too much to do the whole thing at one time, and it's too tedious to do one couplet at a time. So as you know, I try to break them down according to my own intuition, or sometimes there's linguistic direction towards it into smaller units. This particular unit, I found this high-low motif, which I'll point out in just a second. But it does include something having to do with righteous on one hand and wealth on the other hand, pride and modesty or humility as well. Is there anything here that stands? Let's start with this. Is there something here that says, "Wow, I like that. I'm going to put that on my wall"? No, I'll tell you later on today when we get to the last section why I'm thinking of putting it on one's wall or putting it on a sign. There are a lot of first of all, there's a lot of book names I've already mentioned. Migdal Oz is a sefer is a sacred Jewish studies book um, that I just know from selling it, but I don't even know what there may be a number of them, but there's one title, Migdal Oz, and we'll see some others as well. So if there's nothing, then I'll go into it. So
Could it
look,
be
go ahead.
humility goes before honor?
Yeah, you like that one?
Mm. Well, I like the emphasis on humility.
Right. So I think the way that at least Fox understands this is that you're not going to get any honor without some sort of humility, and is seen with the first line of the couplet. On one hand, well, you know what? Let's hold off with that. Let's get to it in order. We'll begin with the beginning. Migdal Oz, a strength of tower, a tower of strength, a strong tower is a tower of strength. And it's interesting. What is the tower of strength here?
Shame
Malcolm?
Adonai.
Right, but
God's
it's not God, it's God's name.
Right.
Any familiarity with that issue of God's name, Rabbi Malka, that you can think of?
Not directly related to that. And I was just thinking when I read that that's the name that we don't pronounce ever.
Well, that's part of it. Exactly.
Right.
There's mystique to the name. There's power in the name itself. B'Shem Adonai Nelech, in the name of God. In the name of God, I think there's maybe a misunderstanding. Like in the name of America, I do this. In the name of liberty, I do this. Well, maybe that's different, but the name of God has power. There's essence of God in the name. That's kind of a contradicting thing, but there's a lot of biblical verses about that, right? Tell me your name, and then God says, I will, I'll be what I will be. Yeah, sure, yeah. No, they're not ready for the name yet. And this whole idea, there's a lot of things about the name. The name is God, and not only in the Israelite tradition as well, in other traditions, other ancient Near East traditions. So that's something noteworthy, I think. So there's power, there's strength in the name.
But maybe the strength is that we don't know how to pronounce it. Maybe that's the strength, that we can't take control of it and act like it's our own because we really don't even know how to pronounce it. That we can't possess it.
So the Migdal Oz, the tower of strength, isn't compared to us. And if you couple that with the business about being proud and being humble, maybe that dovetails with that as well. Good, interesting. Yeah, I like that. And then we have, so the second line in Hebrew, for those that read Hebrew, is Bo Yarutz Tzadik V'Nizgav. If it was modern Hebrew, we'd say that the tzaddik, the righteous person, and the righteous person runs inside of it, bo, inside. But that's why the translation here, Fox's translation is into which the righteous run. Bo, we would say in modern Hebrew, ratzim el, you run to someplace, or you run from someplace. Here's you run into is bo. So not in modern Hebrew, but the legitimate understanding of the only understanding here of the biblical Hebrew. And when the person runs into it, into that name of God, into that fortress, mighty fortress, then that person is lifted up. That tzaddik, that righteous person, is lifted up. Now, does that mean saying the name, or does that mean just hearing the name, being contemplating the name? Because we know how it's spelled, right? But maybe it's not about necessarily saying the name, but it's being in that name. And I must have mentioned in the past, I was influenced by my teacher, Rabbi Art Green, before I considered him my teacher. His book on See My Face. It's called Something See My Face. It's a redback. It's the first of a trilogy that he wrote on his own theology. And it talks a lot about God's name. And maybe these were things that are talked a lot about in Hasidic literature that I wasn't aware of, but he talks there, he stresses the impossible nature of Yud He Vav He. It is Haya, was, Hoveh is, and Yihiyah. It's all in one. It's an impossible word of three tenses. And that kind of sums up the whole thing. That's exactly what human beings are not. We're finite. We're born, we live, we die, right? Almost everything around us we see is like that. Even the mountains, it just takes them longer to be worn down into sand, right? Or the oceans to dry up, or whatever it might be. Or stars to collide with each other, as we now know, or galaxies to collapse, right? Yet God was, is, and will be. Okay.
I took the bow not to mean in. It's when I first read it, but then I think you corrected my thinking. I thought the righteous run with it. and are safe. Run
Uh-huh.
with the name of God. That's the way I took the bow to mean with.
Yeah, I
Instead
think,
of in, because
uh-huh.
they can mean with sometimes too, right?
Yeah, I don't know if that means with. I'm not saying it doesn't, but can't think of it. Would usually with would be et or
Mm.
or im
Mhm.
or be, maybe be, yeah, interesting. And it could possibly mean that as well. If we look into the usage of bow or the bet in biblical language, we may or other Semitic languages, we may find that, and then it means something a little bit different.
Mhm.
It means moving with God and God's ongoing movement.
Right.
And yeah, I think they're both kind of good, and they're both rather spiritual. Like this is not one of the wisdom sayings that has to do with just interpersonal. This is one of the more theological parts, and there have been relatively few of those in the book of Proverbs. I remind you. Okay, so then on that same theme, even using the same word as nizgav and yigba, which is not from the same root, but is still in that same, the assonance is there as a wall, a wall, and the why is nizgava here is oh, how did this? I know I lost how to understand this. So the first part is easy. Hon asher kiryat oz, right? So the wealth of the rich is their fortress. That's not necessarily saying it's good or bad. It's just an observation of the world, right? And a kiryat oz is very similar to migdal oz. A kiryat is a fortress or a fortified city. And a choma, wall, all part of that same imagery. Nizgava, that same, it goes up, rises up. And Nizgav here understood as in their honor, I think, in their raising them up. And that's why the word fancy is used there. But I didn't look as to, hold on, let me see what he does. Oh, I'm sorry, a little fuzzy. It's a rough day. It's a rough day. Going on fumes. A rich man's wealth is his fortified city, and like a lofty wall in his imagination. So I did read on mosquito is dimiono is a rare word, but it could mean here imagine it probably means their imagination. So in their imagination, it goes up like a wall. And protective here is what is translating he's got. He's got it instead as like a lofty wall. To me, that makes more sense. It goes up. Anyway, the imagery of high and low is here, of fortress strength, and all this being applied to the life of a human being. And then another comment on the world, right? Lifnei shever, at the moment before ruin, we find a person's heart is at its highest. Right? That's the first part of that line, Harold. And the second line is, and yet before honor, we find humility. So this kind of chiastic thing going on here. Here too, the word yigba, right? The lifted up, not in a positive way. Okay, any comments about the simple contextual meaning? Or the simpler? So then we go to there's two examples of how this played out in rabbinic. I did the same thing this time as I did 2 weeks ago, was to look for the midrashic traditions, whether in midrash, early midrash, later midrash, or Talmud, to see when a verse from this section was applied to an individual character of the Tanakh, of the Hebrew Bible. So why don't we begin with the first one, Rabbi Malka from Midrash Tehillim.
Understanding of David during his prayer in the cave.
Okay, sorry, just have to give the context for those. The context is important here. In 1 Samuel, 23 and 24, there's a series of episodes where David is running away from Shaul. Saul is trying to kill him because he realizes he's competition. David still remains loyal to him on one hand, at the same time fighting the Philistines and making a name for himself because he's winning in the fight against the Philistines. He's running around the desert, the Judean desert. For those that have been, think of Ein Gedi in that area where there's so many, or Qumran, there's crevices and there's caves and there's canyons to hide. And people keep telling on him. And Saul and his folks, and Saul's leading this unit himself, are catching up with him, not catching up with him. And some of this is referred to, or this episode of being in a cave, where he came close to being in a cave. Shaul goes and relieves himself in that cave. It turns out David and his guys are inside, but he's protected. Now, there's a famous Agadah, which I didn't locate. I didn't spend a lot of time on it. As I say, it's been a difficult morning. A famous Midrashic tradition about the fact that a spider wove its web, or spider weave webs? What do they do with webs? Whatever they do, on the opening where David would have been. So they didn't check that area because how could anybody be in there? The spider's web would have been broken. And I remember being told when I was a teenager, and I asked Sasha now, she doesn't remember this, that you don't kill spiders for that reason. That it's forbidden to kill spiders because we're thankful for that web that they did. It's this, this generational kind of a thing. So remember that, Richard, next time you get up on a chair with your broomstick, because you're scared of the spider.
Yeah, but I don't get on a broomstick. I get on the broomstick.
Okay. Anyway, the episode though is the cave, and it's memorialized or commemorated in the title of Psalm 142.
Mhm.
And in that, the psalm talks about very personal prayer, right? There are psalms that are very personal prayers, psalms which are nationalistic prayers, which are celebratory, which are great kvetching prayers of deep, deep emotions, ceremonial stuff, if I didn't mention that, military. Anyway, there's lots of different kinds there's wisdom psalms. So in the background of this particular tradition of Midrash Tehillim is a collection of different midrashic traditions that's arranged according to the order of the Psalms. 1 to 100 is thought to be the original corpus or the older work, and then somebody at some point felt that, well, where's 100 to 150 or 101 to 150? And then they brought material. I don't remember if it's directly from Yalkut Shimoni, but which is a much later collection anthology of midrashim, but it doesn't matter. It's a real easy way to find rabbinic traditions on Psalms. And there's a common motif in many of the traditions of Midrash Tehillim. I would imagine somebody's written about this. I, at one point, had thought maybe I would do my doctoral thesis on it, but it was too big. It was too overwhelming. But there seem to be a lot of traditions, from my experience in Midrash Tehillim, that do exactly what we're looking at today, where they take the verse and say, "Oh, that's so and so." In not just David, who's considered to be the author or the editor of the book. So that's in the background of this. Sorry, Rabbi Malko, please continue.
Understanding of David during his prayer in the cave. Solomon said in Proverbs 18:10, "The name of the Lord is a strong tower. The righteous run to it and are safe." When the righteous are in distress, they only focus on the Lord. The scripture also says in Psalms 34:2, "I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise shall continually be in my mouth." When David fled from Absalom, he only sang to the Lord. Similarly, when he was in the wilderness of Judah, he only mentioned the Lord. In every trouble he faced, he trusted in the Lord. And when he was in the cave, he called upon the Lord, as it says in Psalms 142:4. "I will cry out to you, O Lord. I say, you are my refuge, my portion in the land of the living." What does it mean that David had understanding? When Saul and David were in the cave, David knew and saw that no one was standing with him in his wealth, wisdom, or strength. Therefore, his only recourse was to pray. David understood and said that he had no good except for prayer. Therefore, it is said, understanding of David, that is in reference to Psalm 142, and so on.
In other words, when all else, you have nothing else. The only thing else you have in life for sure is the presence of God and the name of God, I guess. To be that presence. Think about the fact it's there's a lot of literature on the name of God and how that functions, but think of it in terms of um, how limited it is when there's a temple. When you have a temple dedicated to Adonai, when you're not near the temple, then that's a challenge, right? I know it gives us a place to go up to, a pilgrimage, whatever, place to do the rituals, the ceremonies that people expect of religion, as Maimonides says, that Moses could not have presented a new religion, even though God doesn't need the sacrifices. It would not have worked had Moses said, "Oh, I got a new religion, everybody." It doesn't. He said it would be like today in Maimonides' time if somebody came and said, "I have a new religion, but there's no fasting and there's no praying." And people would say, "That's not a religion. How can you have a religion without fasting and praying?" Of course, he's in the background of Islam as well, maybe less than Christianity. So the fasting is a big deal. Praying certainly on a daily basis, multiple times a day. When you not having a temple present, there you still have this power of God without having something tangible, unless you call a name tangible, but it's ineffable, so I guess it's not tangible. That's an interesting idea, and this is one way it's played out. So we have this lesson from the proverb, and then it's given it's filled in, fleshed out for us in the life of David, because David was in a lot of situations, whether it was with his own son Avshalom or wherever he seemed to be in trouble. I was struck by the beginning of this when he says when it says in 34:2, I will bless the Lord all times, his praise shall continually be in my mouth. I for some reason thought of the music, and that's why I thought it was important for Madalena to put on the music today. Yeah, music is an important thing for us to remember and to utilize, especially when things are being difficult. I know that I use it as many of you know, at the beginning of a funeral, in the same way that I use it at the beginning of a wedding, of a birth ceremony, whatever it is. Our Friday night prayers, our Shabbat morning, we begin with song, without ladies and gentlemen, I'm Rabbi David, none of that kind of stuff. And then the other thing that comes up in this midrashic tradition is the fact that it's something to be done all the time in every situation, not just in times of danger. What does he say? Help me out. I know there was a line here that said all the time, or maybe I just made it up. Oh yeah, in 34:2 on the third line, I will bless the Lord at all times. I was part of I had the privilege of being part of a Beit Din Giur yesterday, a rabbinic panel for conversion. And we get an essay that somebody reflects. We have recommendation from the rabbi who taught the person, the candidate, and there's kind of standard questions that all rabbis ask. Where I've been on the Beit Din for years, for decades in Israel. I was the head of the Beit Din in Stockholm when I was the rabbi. I've been on the Rabbinical Assembly, the Conservative Movement Rabbis Beit Din here, and now I'm doing more with Sandra Kaplan. It's a community Beit Din, which is made up has Reform, Reconstructionist, Conservative, Renewal rabbis as well. And there's these kind of standard questions when somebody I am sponsoring comes before I help prepare them. I'll say, somebody's going to ask you, what's your favorite holiday? Somebody's going to say, what can you tell us what was the last holiday we have? Somebody's bound to say, what's your favorite holiday? Somebody's bound to say, what's your favorite book of the Hebrew Bible? Those kind of things. I asked, after she had a really good essay and she covered a lot of the material. So I asked her yesterday, I said, so where do you find your Jewish practice in everyday life? And she didn't really understand the question at words. I said, the boring stuff. Like I talked about her work. When you're at work, when you're walking on the street, whatever, where do you find? And to me, that's not an easy question. And that's an open end. To me, that's more of like my gentle nudge to find those kinds of things. There were many years that I focused on teaching children brachot, the blessings, not just the blessing of hamotzi and borei piragafen, but all the different blessings for food and for seeing things and for smelling things. That's a way to encourage. For many years of my life, I wore tzitzit. I wore a talit under my shirt. Um, I don't remember if I think I was still doing it. Yeah, I was still doing it in Sweden, especially in the winter. It was another layer of clothing. But I think I stopped when I got here to Palm Springs. A little bit too hot. But the point of walking with tzitzit, of saying blessings, of um, of thinking about what is the aspect of my Jewish identity in this any given situation, to me is that's the essence of being Jewish, I think, and not just when we're studying or not just at a prayer service. And I've been asked a lot for some reason in the last few weeks about how it came to be where I got to Israel. I just had a lot of those conversations, and I said part of our rebellion against conservative Judaism of the 1960s, my friends, my age group, and myself, we went to Camp Ramah. We had a very good conservative movement education, but we rebelled because we wanted more. We wanted something every day, not just summer camp, not just for a month or 2 months at camp, not just on Shabbat. We're looking for something every day, and to me, that's the ultimate and not an easy thing to do, and perhaps more than some of you or many of you are looking for. But that's what I get out of this midrashic tradition. How about you guys? Anybody find something here interesting, upsetting, encouraging?
I thought that David was lacking humility. He said, when he said, David knew and saw that no one was standing with him in his wealth, wisdom, or strength. I thought that lacked humility. But
Right. And that the rabbis turn that around to look
Mhm.
at something virtuous. Yeah.
Right.
Anything else? Okay. Dan, are you with us today?
Oh, Rabbi, sorry, could you check your text?
Oh yeah, sure. No problem. Do I have to do anything else, Madalena?
No.
Okay, great. Thank you for setting this up today. And for those who are asking, which I'm sure all of you are, Madalena says she's coming home for the high holidays. I tried to bribe her to come home earlier, but it doesn't look like it's working. Okay, Dan, you want to read from us? Agadat Breshit, I've mentioned a few times, a really interesting thin volume, which has on each Seder, each part of the ancient land of Israel way of reading the Torah, not in what not in a 3.5 year cycle as opposed to a 1 year cycle. It has something about that portion from the Torah, something about from the prophets, we assume from the Haftarah in that community where it was designed, different kind of a rather different list of Haftarot than we have, and something from the Ketuvim as well. And because I took this from Sefaria and didn't take the time to look up, I can't tell you what Torah portion it's on, and that's on me. But perhaps looking, yeah, we'll leave it for now. In any case, this is Agadat Breshit. We're talking about the last part of the first millennium, I think.
Before shattering, a man's heart is haughty. This refers to Avimelech, whose heart became haughty, as it says, and worthless and reckless men gathered to him, and they followed him.
Okay.
Judges.
We're talking about Book of Judges. Some of us studied this together a few years ago. There are the father Gidon was an unlikely hero, came up in the ranks. They wanted to make him king, as we'll see in a second. He said, "No, I'm not going to be your king." But they made his son king, and his son was Avimelech, who turned out not to be not such a good king. Anyway, that's the background of this.
But humility comes before honor. This is referring to Gideon, his father, whom the Israelites said to him, "Rule over us, you as well as your sons and your grandsons, for you have saved us from the hand of Midian." And what did he say to them? "I will not rule over you, nor will my son rule over you. The Lord will rule over you." The Holy One said to him, "By your life, since you have said this, I will make a king come forth from you, as it says, and Avimelech did right over Israel." But how do we know he was a king? As it says, and they went and made Avimelech king. You said 3 things, as it says, "I will not rule over you, nor will my son rule over you. The Lord will rule over you." Behold, I will give your sons kingship for 3 years, as it says, and Avimelech ruled over Israel for 3 years. Therefore, humility comes before honor. And if Avimelech had been worthy, he would have lived a long life, as it says, "One who hates gain will prolong his days."
Okay, a little bit choppy, right? Feels like little bits and pieces glued together. That might be the characteristic of this. I know that somebody at one point did their dissertation on this because we had the same professor, what do you call it? Same whatever the word is. Advisor, yeah. But I never read it. I did look up quickly to see that this section is on, I remember I said there's Torah, prophets, and Ketuvim of each of the ancient orders, Starot, and or Starim. And this is on Genesis 23, where Abraham goes wandering. It's after the Sodom and Gomorrah story. And I'm guessing the section from Judges was the Haftarah in that particular community, that particular tradition. But so what do we get out of this in any case? What we get out of this, I think, is if we were to go back to the story of Gidon and Avimelech, to that epic, which is a quite a large section, we would see this is all coming to illustrate before shattering a man's heart is haughty. I think that's the kind of thing. And although we don't need it to understand the section in Proverbs, I think, and we don't need to understand the story in Judges. So it's not a needed kind of a connection, but it's one of those connections we talked about last week, which are merely to show, I think, the intertextuality. This kind of network of lines, connecting lines, crisscrossing all throughout the 24 books of the Tanakh. I don't think I have anything more interesting or important to say about this. Anybody else? Okay, then Harold, you want to read 13 to 16 for us, please?
Okay. To answer before listening, this is foolish and disgraceful. A person's spirit can endure an illness, but low spirits, who can bear them? The mind of an intelligent person acquires knowledge. The ears of the wise seek out knowledge. A gift eases a person's way and gives access to the great.
I may have misdiagnosed the units here. It could be this last 2 lines would fit better with the next section, but they're here, and in any case, each of the couplets kind of have their own existence. So let's take them. I just see a strong connection between the first few lines, the first 6 lines. So anybody see something here they'd like to comment on or ask a question about her? And before I forget, Sue, are you with us? Sue Spicer? Well, Sue, it's Sue's birthday today. So if you have a chance to give her a call, she may be preoccupied with something else. We all say happy birthday to you, Sue, and I'll call you in a little bit. Okay, so back to 13 to 16.
To answer before listening, this is foolish and disgraceful. I think, and probably today we would say this.
What are you talking about? What are you talking about? What do you mean? That's so, I can't believe you just said that. That's just so. Okay, for those who are not laughing, I was just demonstrating and it was just a joke. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Malka. Please start
I
over.
think that that's probably something that most people should take to heart, but we don't. I don't think moderns take it serious enough, but they did because of because they said it's not. We would just say that's not a wise thing to do, a smart thing to do. Here they said it's foolish, and they also said it's disgraceful. So they really took that seriously.
Well, I think I look at, we all, some of us, Megan, your profession is to listen, has been to listen. That's what you, I don't mean degrading in any way, but you're actually paid to listen to people, right? Unfortunately, I'm not paid to listen to people, but I have to listen to a lot of people. I don't, that's one of the downsides. I always figured I'm paid to teach and to lead prayer and to kind of lead the way in social justice work. But more often than not, people really want to talk. They want to share with me, and I understand that. I'm not being dismissive of that in any case. But the greatest thing, not in the role of rabbi, but in the role of an individual meeting somebody for the first time, the greatest challenge I have, especially with my Israeli background, is to really actively listen to someone and to think about what they're saying, and that my comments be connected to what they're saying, as opposed to, and we've spoken about this many times, as opposed to, well, I'm waiting my turn to share with them something on the same topic, right? That is it could be relevant, but it's less relevant than, I think, not just showing an interest to make somebody feel good, although that's also a positive thing. I don't think that's a bad thing to sometimes to pretend to be interested because the person needs that kind of attention. That's a form of chesed. I don't think it's a bad behavior. I think you need to be aware of what you're doing. So, but we don't need to be as honest with everybody as sometimes, or the old David Lazar, the Israeli David Lazar, thought that we needed to be, or I needed to be honest. But to ask a question which helps us understand more, that adds to our knowledge. Really, tell me more about that. What do you mean by that? Not like, what do you mean? How could you think that way? And I wish I had those kind of conversations with, I mean, be careful what I wish for, right? With people who are with adversaries from an ideological point of view, right? People who who are convinced right now that Los Angeles is burning. When I left the other day, I had a meeting with somebody in Riverside, so it took me on a different way than I usually go. Instead of coming in through Pasadena and Glendale to my mom's house, it brought me on the 101 through downtown LA. That scene that we saw the other not where the cars were blowing up, which was disturbing to see, but where the masses of people are, and we've seen it before, is on the 101, right next to the Federal Building. It's Alameda Street, for those that know. It took me right by then. I double checked to make sure there were no demonstrations. No, there were signs up there, whatever, but it's not burning. And while there are isolated acts, but there are people in this country, many people that really believe that Los Angeles is burning and there's riots everywhere, that we need the Marines. It's not just, it would be, I wish we had the capacity to have those conversations, calm conversations, to try to understand where people are coming from when they are drawn to that kind of media source, to that kind of reality that they want or they prefer, or they're more willing to believe is true, as opposed to the way that I view things. Yeah, hard to do. Hard to do. I think we did a little bit of it. It was an attempt that we were doing at the showing of the movie No Other Land, although I'm not sure. I'm not sure that it felt like people came with their own opinions, of course, and that's where they were staying, sharing it with others. Okay. Anyway,
Rabbi, this
yes.
just the first couple of years, it made me think of something that I have this term that I use, conversational narcissists, that there are people, and I know a few of them, I'm sure we all do, that whatever subject comes up, whatever you might say about yourself or within, and it's usually around 30 to 60 seconds, that subject is now about this person, and then they just go on and on and on and on about themselves, and then they may go off on a tangent, and then even if you take the conversation back and say something else entirely unrelated, even that other now unrelated subject is about them, and that's what this couplet made me think of.
Right.
Of these people I've known in my life like this.
And they're totally, I think they're basically unaware of themselves, right?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Megan, does that have a name? That phenomena?
It's very normal for people to do that, but it would be very narcissistic. And it is the same thing. You're listening to what the person's saying so you can get your story about it in. But it happens all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if it's a pathology as much as it's a human disorder in conversation.
Hmm.
It sort of takes away from the person who's telling you something.
Of course.
Well, Megan, you can write an article in a professional journal and coin the term conversational narcissist, and you'll become famous for a new term.
Oh,
But-
gosh.
But I want to see the footnote giving giving credit to Richard for coining the
No,
phrase.
actually, it's Tammy Smason should get the credit.
Richard's going to be in, everybody's going to be in there who said something. Yeah.
Okay.
Rabbi,
Yes, Harold.
I think that the first couplet of what we just read, the first couplet and the third couplet. Okay, I'm ignoring the final couplet because you think it might go with the next reading. But the first couplet and the third couplet have more to do with each other than either one does with the second couplet, which is in between them. Because the topic of the first couplet is listening or not listening, but it has to do with listening. And the third couplet talks about acquiring knowledge or seeking out knowledge. And if you acquire knowledge or seek out, you are listening in a sense.
Yeah, I agree with that. But so I'm gonna present a quick on the spot midrash here that would connect that middle section.
Okay.
The middle section is people who are depressed, because that's what the second line is about, right? Person's spirit can endure illness. A lot of people can deal with illness and with pain and suffering, but low spirits, which I understand is depression, you can't. When somebody's depressed, they're not able to hear. It's very difficult for them to hear. They are swept up with themselves, of course. They're caught in a dark pit, in a hole. And so, but that would be a midrash kind of it's me giving a midrash explanation of the juxtaposition of those couplets. But I think you're right. I'll mention again that Fox in his commentary has chosen this entire section, which will be done with, I think, by 20 or so, or 21. No, even more. No, by 21, I think. So another few chapters. But this entire section, he doesn't deal with he doesn't deal with it in what Greenberg would call holistically. He's chosen, I think he said there's really no way to know how these pieces have been together. From time to time, we'll say, well, this is connected to that verse or the one that came before. But the way he presents them in the book are one verse at a time, as opposed to a unit and commenting on the unit, which he will do later on, and he did before we got to this section. Okay. So let's see an example of rabbinic, unless there's anything else. Oh, and also it was Harold's birthday 2 days ago. So happy birthday to you, Harold.
Thank you.
Zaltov, yeah. And it was Sasha's birthday last week. Oh, Okay, so let's see what the now here's a oh, I've spoken a lot about Tanhuma over the years. Another name for Tanhuma is Yilamdenu. There are two names for the same. It's a genre as opposed to a corpus of midrashic literature. These are homilies based on the Torah reading of the land of Israel. And we have fragments, not just books, manuscripts, but some of those fragments were found. I don't know if this particular one was, but some of them were found in the Cairo Geniza, which I mentioned a number of times, a treasure trove of all sorts of interesting alternative to what we all often thought was the normative Jewish tradition of prayer, for instance, or a lot of things, a lot of things from the land of Israel, from the material from the land of Israel as opposed from Babylonia. And this section was published, I think it's around beginning of the end of 19th, beginning of 20th century, Osar Midrashim, by a really interesting guy. I would have loved to have met this person. Orthodox or ultra-Orthodox rabbi who somehow had an affinity to, he knew about publishing and encyclopedias. He published an encyclopedia, a Torah encyclopedia, or a kosher encyclopedia, we'll call it, called Otzar Yisrael. He has this great volume that I use for years. Sometimes I have these really obscure traditions about customs that I share with you. My first source for that was Otzar Tameh Minhagim. Otzar Minhagim. He has Otzar means treasure or collection. And so this is from Otzar Midrashim, 2 volumes that he published, bits of manuscripts that were not well known, that were not printed until that time when this was done. And this is a section of Yilam Denu, which has, and it's part of a homily that is in that section of towards the end of the book of Genesis, when Joseph is told that his father is ill. Would you read this for us, Harold?
Oh. Behold, your father is ill. Genesis 48:1. This is what was meant when scripture stated, one spirit can endure an illness, but low spirits, who can bear them? One who has led a difficult life in their youth is unable to remain healthy later on. Such was the case with Jacob. Esau persecuted him, and then Laban, and he met the angel and the trouble with Dinah, and then with Joseph. Therefore, when he reached old age, parts of his body began to fail him, which is the Torah mentions is his illness. I'm kind of filling in what I think.
Yeah, I'm wondering if this is something I translated at some point. In any case, and there's a typo here, but in any case, the idea of why is it mentioned here, your father is ill, you should understand, this is what I get out of it, is that the connection between the two halves of the verse in Proverbs is that while one can suffer, but at some point though, there's just so much suffering just leads to the fact you can't stay healthy. We say when somebody's in their old age that their body is shutting down, right? Their body is slowly dying, different parts of it, different pieces. And this is a typical example of how somebody was either studying Proverbs and got to this verse and said, "Oh, that's like Jacob in his old age," or somebody was studying the story of Jacob and said, "Oh, that reminds me of that verse that backs this up." Making that connection. Okay. Anything else on this? Charles, you want to read 1719 for us?
Turn on the mic.
Great.
1719. The first to speak in court seems right. So the other party cross-examines. The lot puts an end to strife and separates those locked in dispute. I don't quite follow that. A sibling offended is more formidable than a stronghold. Such strife is like the bars of a fortress.
Okay, so the reason I thought that I thought after I looked more closely into Fox's commentary that the last 2 lines of the previous section, a gift eases a person's way, and gives access to the great. He goes on quite a bit about how bribes and it's very subjective what to give a gift to somebody to get something for it or not get something for it. You do it just because that's what you do to honor leaders that were very, very common in all societies until rather recently in human history. It still remains strong in certain circles, whether it's a jumbo jet or whether it's a compliment, whatever it might be. So that has to do with a court case, he says, possibly, right? That before you bring a case to court, it's good to what do they call schmeiss? What's the word to grease the palm, something icky like that. Is there what expression am I thinking of? Anybody?
Bribe.
Yes, but isn't there something with grease to grease somebody's hands?
That's to bribe them.
Yeah, okay. So and then comes this first part, right? A typical observation. You get to the court, or you see one documentary, or you hear one side of it. Very often you say, oh, wow, that's compelling argument. Until the other party cross-examines. And that's kind of the healthy state of things. There should be back and forth. But, says the book of Proverbs, and this is totally connected. In this case, the couplets are connected. But you know the best way to get out of a trial and this back and forth of trying to figure out who's right? Drawing lots. That's what the lots are here. Goral. Yeah, in Hebrew, goral. Excuse me. Midyanim yashbit hagoral. In other words, hagoral yashbit midyanim. Midyanim. No, midyanim. I would have said midyanim. Anyway, yeah, that's the best way to get through it. Flip a coin, which is, and that's the way to that's the way to end this this problem between two who are locked in dispute. If you look in the Hebrew, for those that read Hebrew, the fourth line, uvein atzumim yafrid. Atzumim we would usually think as large, strong, big, atzum, as it's used in Hebrew today. But there's a verse in Isaiah which shows that atzum can also be those who are in dispute. Perhaps Fox says perhaps it's a big dispute, a huge argument. That's why it's called atzum. And then this other thing, which still seems to be related, where when you run into when you have somebody, a family member, who's offended, right? That can be far more difficult to figure out how to solve the problem, how to reach an agreement, because this is talking about agreement between two arguing people, than well, no, the then part comes in the second section after this. That's a bad thing to do. It's kind of like try to stay away from litigating your siblings, your family members. That becomes more bitter. And the interesting part here is he goes back to using two terms which connect with the first section that we did today: Kiryat Oz, right, a stronghold, or Variach Armon, the bars of a fortress. Okay.
I didn't know what, when I said it doesn't make sense to me, I didn't know what the word lot meant, and you explained that. But I guess saying it another way is flipping a coin.
Exactly.
But as one who was a trial lawyer, flipping a coin doesn't seem satisfactory in a dispute, especially if the coin is the one you didn't pick.
Right. It's but that's kind of the thing with judges, right? Also, what court does your case land up in? This business we're talking about now, where will you find a judge? How can you bring the case to a judge in the country that will be to your liking? It's rather cynical, though. From a legal point of view, it's a bit cynical, isn't it? Yeah.
For sure.
Well, great. Well, thanks.
Rabbi?
Yes, Harold.
Now maybe I'm taking this too literally from the translation, and because I don't know what the original Hebrew said, but when it says the first to speak in court, and then till the other party cross-examines, does that mean that I mean, taking it literally, does that mean that in ancient Israel, legal disputes were settled kind of similarly to the way we do today, where one witness testifies before one party and then the other party literally cross-examines?
Yeah, yes, I think so. We have an example of this with the two prostitutes with the two babies and one dies. I don't know if we have. Can anybody think of another example, Sasha, of another example of a court case in biblical literature where there's two sides? There's got to be.
Mhm. I mean, I just find it fascinating from a historical point of view. That's all.
Yeah, I think, I don't know that they had lawyers in biblical times. I think people presented their case, and this is said with such the strength of the words here. Tzaddik, right? The first person, who and it doesn't say tzaddik, it says tzaddik. I would say the first person who speaks is got to be right because listen to the way he presented it. It's a common thing we do. We often do. We'll pick up. That's why I mentioned documentaries. We see one documentary, and we often feel that we have some expertise in the time because the documentary was so well researched, so well good. But there's often another documentary on the other side of things.
But even with Moshe, didn't the elders sit at the city gate and judge cases?
Yeah.
And with Moshe, he got help. Yethro told him to get help with judging and listening to all these cases. It sounds like they did have kind of a sort of judicial system.
Oh, absolutely. We just don't know how it was presented, though.
Mhm.
Who was this? Sasha, what did you say?
No, just I was thinking of the older cases where they go where there were Edim and then decided among the Edim if somebody was going to be
Right. So Sasha mentioned the testimony of witnesses. There's a lot about that, right? And if somebody is a false witness, then they get the punishment that they tried to get framed the other person for. So there is a lot of material. I was thinking of stories.
Okay.
What about the daughters of Selosphit that Moses decided? He couldn't decide. He had to ask Hashem.
Right. So it's a little bit different because there weren't two parties, so to speak. In other words, there was a law, and they came to challenge the law, which we don't do today. We challenge laws in this country, at least. Not only, I guess, yes, you can take the government I guess you could take the government to court as well, right? Claiming that it's unconstitutional. Maybe that's what they were doing. Except for they weren't saying it's unconstitutional. They're saying it was immoral. It was unethical. And it was the law the way it is should not be this way. And the whole point of the story and the other stories that Moses has to ask is that there new cases will always come up that are complex, that will always need revelation, some sort of figuring out what the new way.
Which is the portion in the Torah, Mishpatim, I forgot which one. There's another one where Moses is told to appoint judges.
Moses, once again,
is told to appoint judges.
Yes, exactly right. It's Yitro, Parshat Yitro. Yeah, and it's before. Anyway, okay, good. So we're 3 minutes over. Luckily, Bamidbar Rabbi here. I wasn't paying attention. This is an alternative to a tradition we did last time. It doesn't it refers to a different verse, but we actually did it last time on the previous one having to do with Korach. So we'll go directly to 2024. But I do know that it's not Sue's birthday; it's Sid's 89th birthday today. Sid's 89th birthday.
Wow.
So maybe we'll take turns giving him a phone call to lift his spirits today. Okay, then who do we got now? Eileen, you want to read for us 2024?
Sure. A man's belly is filled by the fruit of his mouth. He will be filled by the produce of his lips. Death and life are in the power of the tongue. Those who love it will eat its fruit. He who finds a wife has found happiness, and he has won God's favor. The pauper speaks in terms of mercy. The rich person's answer is harsh. There are companions to keep one's company, and there is a friend more devoted than a sibling.
Okay, the different things come up here. Three of the couplets have to do with speaking, right? The first two, and then the fourth. Maybe one could say the last one, the companionship, and a friend, maybe that has to do with talking. But then you get this business about who finds a wife has found happiness. So I'm not sure this is it, but we have a similar thing in Pirkei Avot, which is the wisdom tractate of wisdom in the Mishnah. It says, I didn't bring the direct quote, but it says something like, make sure you have lots of guests in your home, right? Your home should be open to guests. Do you remember the Lashon, Sasha? Yehi beitcha patuach le. Anyway, your house should be open to guests. And then the next paragraph is, and somebody said three things, ve'al tarbes sicha im ha'isha. And don't talk too much to a woman. And they're juxtaposed. One of the commentators, maybe Rabbeinu Yonah, if I remember correctly, but don't quote me on that. The commentator says they're juxtaposed because, especially when you want to bring more guests at home, your wife will be against it. So don't talk to her too much about having home hospitality. It's a very misogynistic way, or a very sexist way. It's even misogynistic of speaking with women. And perhaps the idea here, and a big perhaps, was that all these rules, these dictums about talking, you should know that it's good to have a wife who doesn't do that, right? The same way that Miriam was punished and not Aaron for speaking about Moses' wife, that kind of bias that male-centric culture has towards the woman, the gossiping. And maybe that's what it is. The imagery here is really interesting. I don't remember us seeing this exact way of saying it, that you fill your belly with the fruit of your mouth and your produce with the lips. So this idea of thinking that what you say is real, that it matters what you say. There's another way of saying it matters, what words matter. And you become who you talk as well. Who or what you talk is what you become, is who you become. That's my understanding of this. And just because we'll just zip to the end, if you would read this one section that you'll see in bold, Mavet v'chaim biyad halashon. The reason I asked beforehand, would anybody put this on a sign or a poster in their house? The Israeli army bases, the more, not the forward bases so much, but the more the educational bases where you do your training, basic training in tank school, whatever. There's master sergeants that are constantly, you get assigned to paint rocks and to sweep fields and whatever it is, and to paint signs. And the one that the tank school, there were lots of signs. Also the tank base that I was in afterwards as well. There's signs all over, these big metal signs that have verses on them, verses from the Tanakh, to encourage fighters, whatever. And that's a challenging thing, but I distinctly remember the one that said, Mavet v'chaim b'yad lashon. And so what would you say? Was anybody here in the American military? And well, you weren't in the Navy though, you were in the Army, right? Was anybody in the Navy?
Army? Yeah.
What do they say in the Navy? Loose lips sink ships.
Oh, yeah.
This is exactly that. Not exactly that, but it's like, yeah, there's what you say matters, and it's life or death. Okay, and then this matzah isha, matzah tov is also well quoted a lot. It's in modern Israeli language. People say you found a good woman, you found good. You found a woman, you found good. Right? It's a very male centric. Yes, Malka. Do you want to say
No,
something?
I was just.
Okay, so would you read Ruth Rabbah for us?
Boaz ate and drank, and his heart was merry. Why was his heart merry? It is because he recited a blessing on his food. Alternatively, his heart was merry because he ate different sweets after the meal, because it accustoms the tongue to recite Torah. Alternatively, his heart was merry as he engaged in Torah study, as it is stated, "The Torah of your mouth is better for me." Alternatively, his heart was merry as he was seeking a wife, as it is stated, "One who has found a wife has found goodness."
Yeah, I couldn't resist this. This is just a cute one, right? It's this lovely example of, oh, it could mean that, or it could mean that, or it could mean that, or it could mean that. Taking pieces from all over the Tanakh and bringing it back to Boaz, who is is at the height of the harvest of his grain, and he's in his goren in his threshing shed. Um, and here he is with a glad heart. So may our hearts be glad this week, gladder than they are in the news from studying Torah, from being with friends, good friends, as the verse above it mentioned, from watching our tongues, from all the things that are here. And thanks for being here. We'll meet again next week. So
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
bye. Sorry to go over so late.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.